In this tutorial, I will teach you how to make a baby shroom using my pattern. Before you start, please note that this pattern uses US terminology. This pattern is also available on my Etsy store if you prefer a written PDF pattern. The link to my Etsy is in the description below this video. Please do not copy, repost, or claim this pattern as your own. I do not give permission to repost this pattern or translate it. You are more than welcome to sell the finished product. I just ask that you credit me and provide the link to the pattern when you sell the finished product online. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below the video in the comments section, reach out to me on Instagram, or email me at the email that you see on screen. This pattern uses the following terminology and abbreviations. Make sure you're familiar with them before you begin the pattern. On screen is the list of materials and tools that I use to make this plushie. First, we're going to make a slip knot. Fold the short end of the yarn over the long end to make a loop. Then stick your thumb and index finger from your other hand through the loop and pull on the yarn to create another loose loop. Attach your crochet hook to that loop and then pull the short end and the long end to create a knot. Now that we have our slip knot, we're going to chain 2. So yarn over and pull that loop through the hook to create a chain. Do this twice. Now we're going to find the second chain from the hook and we're going to make 6 single crochets into that chain. Start by inserting your hook into the chain, yarning over and pulling that yarn through. You should have 2 loops on your hook, then yarn over and pull through both loops. That's your first single crochet. I'm going to attach a stitch marker to this single crochet so I know that this is the first stitch in the round. Now we're going to insert our hook into the same stitch we just crocheted into and make 5 more single crochets into that same stitch. Now that we're at the end of the round, we're going to count our stitches from the stitch marker to make sure we have 6. So starting from the stitch marker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now that we're in round 2, we're going to increase into the first stitch and then single crochet into the next stitch. First, I'm making 1 single crochet, that's the start of our increase, and I'm going to move that stitch marker into that first single crochet. Then into the same stitch, I'm going to work another single crochet to create our increase. If you're not familiar with an increase, in this instance, it's just 2 single crochets into the same stitch. Most of the time when you create an increase, it will look like a V. Next, we're going to create a single crochet into the next stitch. So that's the pattern we're going to repeat around this row 3 times to create 9 stitches. So into the next stitch, increase, and now we're going to put a single crochet into the next stitch. And we're going to repeat this one more time. Increase into this stitch, and into the next stitch a single crochet. At the end of the row, make sure you push your work up so that it's facing the right side out. And then we're going to count our stitches to make sure that there's 9 stitches. So counting from your stitch marker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now let's get ready to make the next round. We're going to do 3 single crochets and then an increase into the 4th stitch. I've got my stitch marker in my first single crochet, and now I'm going to make 2 more single crochets. And now I'm going to make an increase into the 4th stitch. So looking back at your work, you should have 3 single crochets and an increase to make 5 stitches total. Now we're going to repeat this one more time, 3 single crochets and 1 increase. You should have 1 stitch left over, and we're just going to make 1 single crochet into it. At the end of this row, your work should look like this, and you should have 11 stitches total. Now in this next round, we're going to be working into the front loops only of these stitches. So here is what the front loop looks like. You're going to yarn over and pull through, have 2 loops on your hook, and then yarn over and pull through again to make 1 single crochet. You'll crochet as normal. These stitches will just be worked into 1 loop instead of 2 on these stitches. So here's the front loop once again, and we're going to make a single crochet into it. And we're going to do the same thing the whole way around, only crocheting into those front loops. At the end of the round, your work should look like this, and you should have 11 stitches total. When we flip our work inside out, you can see those back loops are still open, and we're going to save them for later for when we start working the body color onto our mushroom cap. You should see 11 loops here. In round 5, we're going to work an increase into every stitch of this round to make 22 stitches total. I've already placed 1 single crochet into the stitch. Now let's add another to that same stitch to make our increase. We're going to repeat this all the way around, and then I'll meet you back at round 6. At the end of round 5, your work should look like this. And now we're going to work 1 single crochet into every stitch for round 6 to make 22 stitches total. Here's the first single crochet. I'm going to make another one, and then I'll meet you back here at the end of the round. Now this is what your work should look like, and that was the final round of the mushroom cap. So to finish off here, we're going to remove our stitch marker, and then we're going to slip stitch into the next 2 stitches and fasten off. To fasten off, cut a short yarn tail to weave in the end later. Remove the extra fluff at the end of your yarn, and then pull the yarn through and pull tightly to secure a knot. This is what the work should look like when you're done. Now attach that tail to a yarn needle and push your work inside out. we're going to work our yarn up through these stitches to hide it back behind the back loops that we left open. Now, with the hood open facing you, we're going to attach our body color yarn into the back loops of round 4. But first, let's look at these back loops. This loop and the following loop don't line up to each other because they are the first loop and the last loop of that round. As you can see here, they line up to each other diagonally instead of horizontally. Because of this, we're going to start in the loop on the right. Make sure that your work is facing you this way so that the whole of the hood is towards you and the top of the mushroom cap is away from you. So now let's pick up that body color yarn and loop it onto our hook. We're going to pull it through that first back loop and then create a knot with the body color yarn to secure it to this mushroom cap. Then we're going to insert our hook into that same stitch we just tied the body color to, and you're going to chain 1. This chain doesn't count as a stitch. Now we're going to make a single crochet into that same stitch, and that will be the first stitch of this round. Make sure you place your stitch marker into this stitch so you don't lose track of the first stitch of the round. Now we're going to single crochet into the rest of the back loops of this round to make 11 stitches total. If you remember from earlier, the next back loop is a little higher than this first back loop, so insert your hook into that one and make a single crochet. Turn your work a little and then find the next back loop and make another single crochet into it. They should be easier to find now because they'll all be in a line instead of being misaligned like the first 2 were. So make a single crochet into all of the back loops and just make sure you have 11 total at the end of the round. Once I'm at the end of the row here, I'm pulling a long loop through so my work stays secured, and I'm going to count my stitches to make sure that I have 11 because crocheting into the back loops can be kind of tricky and we want to make sure we have all of our stitches. So unroll your work slightly so the tops of the stitches are visible to you, and then count your stitches from the stitch marker. Here's the first stitch, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. Now we're in round 8 and we have to single crochet into the first stitch of that round. Don't forget to add your stitch marker. Now we're going to do one more single crochet and then an increase. We're going to repeat this pattern 2 more times, and then we're going to single crochet 2 into the remaining 2 stitches of the round. So after that third repeat, we should have 2 stitches remaining, and we're just going to single crochet into each one of them. At the end of round 8, you should have 14 stitches total, so here I'm just quickly counting my stitches to make sure that I got the row count correct. Now we're in round 9 and we're going to start off with 1 single crochet. Now we're going to do 3 more single crochet and an increase. This starts the repeat of our round. As you can see here, if you ignore the first stitch of the round, which is why I'm covering it with my thumb, you have 3 single crochets and then an increase. Now we're going to repeat that 2 more times, 3 single crochets and an increase. After 3 repeats, you should have 1 stitch remaining unworked, and we're just going to work 1 single crochet into it. This is what your work should look like at the end of that round. As you can see, I'm counting from the first stitch marker to make sure that I have the correct amount of stitches, which should be 17 stitches. Now that we've finished that round, we're going to flip our work right side out. So start by pushing the top of the mushroom cap out and then rolling your work forward and towards you so that the right side of the mushroom cap is facing out. This is what your work should look like. Now in round 10, we're going to put 1 single crochet into every stitch to make 17 stitches. You might want to roll the cap backwards so that you can see your work better here. At the end of round 10, this is what your work should look like. Starting in round 11, we're going to make the arms. So first off, we're going to make 3 single crochets. Now we're going to create a bobble stitch. To do this, yarn over and insert your hook into the next stitch. Then yarn over and pull up a loop so that you have 3 loops on your hook. Then yarn over and pull through 2 of those loops. You should now have 2 loops on your hook. We're going to repeat this step until we have 5 loops on our hook. This stitch essentially creates 4 unfinished double crochets, and then we finish them off by linking them together. Once we have 5 loops on our hook, we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 of those loops. Now that we've made our bobble stitch, we're going to pull that stitch tight and push it out, and then we're going to make 5 single crochets. Now we're going to make another bobble stitch. Just as a reminder, you're going to create 4 unfinished double crochet stitches, and you should have 5 loops on your hook before you finish the stitch. So now we have 5 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5. Now to finish off the row, we have to make 7 more single crochets. At the end of that round, we should still have 17 stitches. So looking from the top down, I'm going to show you what these stitches look like and which ones you should count, because counting bobble stitches can be kind of tricky. So starting from the stitch marker, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one's kind of small, so don't miss it. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. This is what your work should look like now. The next step is to add our safety eyes. We're going to place our safety eyes between rounds 10 and 11, 3 visible stitches apart. I like to place my safety eyes really close to the bobble stitch, so I locate the stitch that's at the corner of the top of the bobble stitch, and I place an eye in there on either side. Before I put the backs on my safety eyes, I make sure that they're aligned properly and that they're not lopsided. If you have smaller safety eyes than me, you might have to stick your safety eyes into the center of a stitch instead of between stitches like I have here. Once you're happy with the placement, pop the washers onto the backs of your safety eyes so they don't budge. Now the next 2 rounds are the same. We're just going to put a single crochet into every stitch of the round to make 2 full rounds of 17 stitches. I'll show you a couple stitches here, specifically how you're supposed to work into these bobble stitches. So when I work into a bobble stitch, I use my thumb to push the stitch back so that I can see the tops of the stitches better, and then I work into those stitches. Bobble stitches can sometimes be a little bulky and they might obscure the tops of the stitches and make it difficult to locate. So here I'm going to use my thumb once again to push down the bobble stitch to see the tops of the stitches so that I can work into them. That was the end of round 12, and this is what your work should look like, and I'll meet you back here at the end of round 13. This is what your work should look like after you finish round 13. You should have 3 visible rows underneath your eyes. Now we're at round 14 and we're going to make 5 single crochets. This should put you just below the first arm. Now in the next stitch, we're going to make a bobble to create the first leg. Now that you've finished your bobble, we're going to make 3 single crochets before the next bobble. So as you can see here, the first leg bobble is just inside the arm bobble. We're going to do the same with the next leg bobble. Depending on the type of yarn you use and your tension, you might need to adjust where you place your bobbles. Just know that they should be 1 stitch inside of the arms. So now let's make our next bobble stitch. Now that we've completed that stitch, we should have 7 more stitches in the round, and we're going to put a single crochet in each of them. This is what your work should look like after you finish that round. Now we're going to stuff our mushroom. Just as a quick side note here, my stuffing isn't usually brown. It's brown in this case because I ran out of polyfill stuffing and my puppy turned out to rip open one of my couch pillows. So that's what I'm using here. I'm using the stuffing from that pillow. But anyway, make sure your plushie is lightly stuffed. Do not overstuff it or you'll be able to see your stuffing between your stitches. Now we're going to make some decreases in our final round. But first I want to show you the 2 types of ways you can create decreases. First is an invisible decrease. You make an invisible decrease by inserting your hook into the next 2 front loops of your stitches. Then you yarn over and pull through both of those front loops. You should have 2 loops on your hook, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through both of those loops. An invisible decrease looks similar to a single crochet, but it is a little bit more difficult for beginners to do. So now I'm going to undo this stitch and show you how to do a regular decrease. Start by inserting your hook into the next stitch. Then yarn over and pull up a loop. Next, you're going to insert your hook into the following stitch and then yarn over and pull up a loop. You should have 3 loops on your hook, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. A decrease looks like an upside down increase. Instead of being a V, it's an inverted V. They're easier to make as a beginner, but they use a little bit more yarn and you might be able to see in between stitches a little bit more than you would with an invisible decrease. Now we're going to finish off the round with 7 more decreases. So insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, then insert your hook into the following stitch, pull up a loop, and then pull through 3 loops on your hook to create your decrease. We're going to repeat this until we have 1 stitch left over in the round. So now we're going to do 1 slip stitch into this final stitch. To make a slip stitch, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then pull through 1 loop on your hook. Now round 15 is finished and it's safe to fasten off. But let's make sure to fasten off with a long tail because we're going to use it to embroider the mushroom cap with spots. Now I'm using my crochet hook to pull that yarn tail through before we start sewing our work closed. Now attach your yarn needle to that yarn tail, and we're going to sew through the front loops only of the last row to close our work. As you can see here, this is the first front loop. We're going to pull our yarn through that, and then we're going to go into the next front loop, and we're going to go into every front loop that we see in this last row before tying a knot. Once you've sewn through all the front loops, pull gently on your yarn to close the hole and stuff any yarn that comes off of your tail into the hole so that we don't waste that. Next, we're going to loop our yarn through any stitch in particular, it doesn't really matter, and we're going to make a loop, twist it, and push our yarn needle through it, and then pull tightly to create a knot. Now we're going to thread our needle to the top of our work just underneath the mushroom cap so that we can embroider some spots on our mushroom. Once you pull the yarn up, your bottom of your work might pucker a little bit, and that'll make it easier for the mushroom to stand upright when you sit it on a flat surface. Now insert your needle into the same spot you threaded it up to, and we're going to pull it through the spot where you want your first spot to begin. Then you're going to locate one stitch or two stitches below where you've entered the cap, and we're going to pull through that entry point one more time to make one spot. We're going to do this 2 more times in the same spot, and that yarn will fall on either side of that first line of embroidery to create a more circular spot. When you pull your yarn through, it might help to use your finger to nudge it into the right position. So we should have 3 loops here on our first spot, and we're going to repeat that through the entire cap. I've already moved my yarn to the next spot where I want a new spot to be. Just make sure that when you thread your needle through to your new locations for each spot, that it's only going through the cap and not the body as well. We're going to repeat those steps for as many spots as you want on your cap. Each spot should begin with the middle line of the spot, and then after that middle line you're going to make a line on either side of that middle line to create a more circular spot. As you can see here, my yarn is only going through the cap and it's not going into the body at all. I'll go ahead and let this video run so that you can see where I place all of my spots, but you can place them really wherever you want. They don't have to necessarily be in the body color either. They can be in any color that you want. I've made mushrooms in the past with a bunch of different colored spots, not just all one color, and you can really do whatever you want. Now I'm going to show you what you should do if you end up not having enough yarn on your needle to make as many spots as you want. So here I have one line of this spot and I can't really finish it with the amount of yarn I have left, so I'm going to push my yarn needle through where I began all of these stitches. And as you see, I have some bunched up yarn, so I'm cutting it where that bunch started to happen, where the yarn is bare, just so that I don't have to pull off extra fluff when I remove my yarn needle from the yarn. Now I've cut a length of yarn that I feel is enough to finish my spots, and I'm going to put it onto my yarn needle now. Once I've threaded that yarn through, I'm going to find that spot where I just cut the yarn and insert my yarn into that spot and through to the spot that I hadn't finished yet. And I'm holding the old yarn tail so that when I pull through, it doesn't get pulled through into the middle of the plushie with the rest of the yarn. Now we have two short yarn tails on this side, and we're just going to tie them together so that they are both secure. Now we're just going to continue our work as normal. I'm going to finish this spot and then I'm going to make a few more spots. Another tip when you're embroidering, you can use your yarn needle to shift the yarn around if it didn't fall in the place where you wanted it. As you could see here, I had a little bit of a red gap in between the two strands of yarn, so I used my yarn needle to loosen it a little and then used my finger to move it to where I wanted it to go. This is what the cap looked like when I was satisfied with the spots, and now we're going to fasten off. So first, make sure your yarn is coming out the same spot where it came in, and we're just going to tie the ends together here. Once you've tied them together, you can cut the yarn and tuck it back into the plushie by pushing it gently inside with your scissors or another tool. Now this next step is optional, but I think it adds a lot of character to these little baby shrooms, so I'm going to embroider some blush on and show you how I do that. First, I'm cutting a strand of pink yarn and I'm attaching it to my yarn needle. Next, I'm going to insert my yarn needle behind one of the arms and pull it through just below the center of the eye. Now pull through gently and catch the end of the yarn before it pulls through all the way. And we're going to want to hold that yarn tail as we work on this first stitch. Now turn your work so you can see the face, and we're going to insert our yarn needle into the bobble stitch, so all that's between where your blush starts and ends is one of those unfinished double crochets from the bobble stitch and one more stitch. You're going to pull your yarn through where you started to create one single line of blush, and then we're going to do it one more time, inserting our yarn needle into those same two stitches to create another line of blush. This time, before you finish that blush, insert your yarn needle just below the other eye in the middle of that eye, and we're going to repeat the same steps for this side. As you can see here, I sewed my blush a little bit crooked and I can't adjust it to be completely horizontal with my needle. And even if I covered it up with the second strand of blush, it would still be obvious. So what we're not going to do is insert our needle back through, because you can pull through stuffing that way. Instead, we're going to remove our yarn needle from the yarn and we're going to pull that yarn through gently to undo that embroidery. Now that the yarn is out, I'm going to put the yarn needle back on the yarn, and I'm going to insert my yarn needle lower on that little bit of bobble stitch so that it doesn't embroider a crooked line. Now when I finish that second line of embroidery on that cheek, I'm going to insert my yarn needle through to where I started and tie a knot with the long end and the short end of this yarn. Finally, cut that yarn and use your scissors or another tool to gently push that yarn tail inside of your plushie. Now your little baby shroom is finished. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and feel free to comment down below if you have any questions or comments about the pattern. Alternatively, you can also email me at the email that appears on screen right now if you have any questions or concerns about the pattern. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!